I stood there in the back row of that fancy auditorium, my legs aching from a double shift at the warehouse and my hands still greasy from fixing a carburetor that morning. The air smelled like perfume and polished wood, nothing like the oil and sweat I'm used to. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. For hours a night for 6 years will do that to a man, but I couldn't stop staring at the stage. Camille was up there, my wife, glowing in her cap and gown, a doctor at last. I dreamed of this moment as much as she had. Every paycheck I'd handed over, every late-night Uber run, every time I said no to a beer with the guys so I could pay her tuition, it was all for this. My chest swelled with pride, and I thought, we did it. Babe. We really did it. The crowd clapped as she crossed the stage, her smile wide and bright, her dark hair shining under the lights. I adjusted my tie, borrowed from a buddy because I never owned one, and waited for her to look my way. She didn't. She floated down the steps, and I started pushing through the crowd, my boots heavy on the carpeted floor. I wanted to hug her, to tell her how proud I was, how every sacrifice was worth it. But then she stopped near a group of her med school friends, all dressed in suits and dresses that cost more than my truck. A man stepped up beside her, tall, sharp-looking, with a suit that fit like it was made for him. His hair was slicked back, and he had this easy confidence I could never pull off. Camille grabbed his arm, her face lighting up even more, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is my husband, Julian. He's the reason I'm here today." The words hit me like a wrench to the gut. Husband? Julian? I froze, my breath stuck somewhere between my lungs and my throat. The crowd clapped again, polite and happy, and I just stood there, a ghost in my own life. My hands clenched into fists, the calluses rubbing against each other, reminding me of every hour I'd worked for her. 6 years of my life, poured into her dream, and she didn't even glance my way. I watched her laugh, her head tilting back like she used to do with me, and Julian smiled down at her like he'd been there all along. My ears rang, drowning out the chatter around me. I wanted to scream, to march up there and demand answers, but my feet wouldn't move. All I could do was stare as the woman I loved, the woman I'd built this moment for, erased me without a second thought. I don't know how long I stood there, lost in the blur of clapping hands and flashing cameras. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Maybe I'd heard her wrong. Maybe it was a joke, some weird med school prank I didn't get. But then she leaned into Julian, her hand resting on his chest, and I saw the way her friends nodded, like they'd known him forever. My stomach twisted, and I felt the weight of every dollar I'd spent. Every night I'd come home to an empty bed because she was studying. I'd paid for that gown she was wearing, the textbooks she'd highlighted, the rent on her downtown condo while I slept in a one-room dump with a leaky roof. And now she was calling this guy her husband? My vision blurred, not from tears, I wouldn't let that happen, but from pure, raw shock. People moved around me, brushing past like I was invisible, and maybe I was. To them, I was just some guy in a borrowed tie, not the man who'd carried Camille through 6 years of hell. My heart pounded, loud and heavy, and I wondered if she'd ever planned to tell me. Did she think I'd just fade away, happy to be her stepping stone? I replayed her words in my head. He's the reason I'm here today, and they cut deeper each time. I was the reason she was there. Me. Mason Reed. Not Julian, whoever he was. I'd given up everything, my time, my money, my dreams, so she could have this. And now she was standing there, rewriting our story, handing my victory to someone else. I took a step back, my boots scuffing the floor, and the sound snapped me out of my daze. I couldn't stay there, surrounded by her new life, her new lie. My chest ached, but I straightened up, forcing air into my lungs. I wasn't going to fall apart, not here, not in front of her and her fancy crowd. I turned toward the exit, my mind spinning with questions I didn't have answers to. How long had this been going on? When did I stop being her husband? And why did she think she could just throw me away like I was nothing? As I pushed through the double doors into the cool night air, I felt the first crack in my world, but I didn't know then how deep it would go. All I knew was that Camille had taken everything I'd given her and handed it to someone else, and I wasn't sure what that left me with. I stood in that quiet hallway outside the auditorium, the muffled sound of laughter and clinking glasses seeping through the walls like a taunt. My hands were shoved deep in my pockets, the borrowed tie hanging loose around my neck now, like it didn't belong on me anymore. The air out here was cooler, but it didn't calm the heat rising in my chest. I kept replaying Camille's voice in my head. This is my husband, Julian, and every time it hit me, it felt like a punch I couldn't dodge. I wanted to believe I'd misheard her, that it was some kind of mistake, a slip of the tongue. Maybe she'd had too much champagne, or maybe I was just too tired to think straight after pulling a double shift. But deep down, I knew better. I'd seen the way she looked at him, the way her hand rested on his arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. I leaned against the wall, the cold plaster pressing into my back, and stared at the polished floor. My boots looked out of place here, scuffed and worn next to the shiny tiles. I tried to piece it together. When did this happen? How long had she been calling this Julian guy her husband? My mind raced back through the last 6 years, searching for clues I'd missed. I'd been so busy working fixing cars, loading boxes, driving strangers around town that I hadn't noticed her slipping away. Or maybe I had, and I just told myself it was stress, med school pressure, nothing personal. I'd been a fool, hadn't I? A fool who thought love was enough to keep us together, even when she started spending more nights at the library than at home, even when her calls got shorter and her smiles got rare. The auditorium doors swung open, and a burst of noise spilled out, cheers, chatter, the kind of happiness I wasn't part of. I straightened up, wiping my palms on my pants, and that's when I saw Sadie, Camille's little sister, rushing toward me. Her eyes were wide, her face pale like she'd just seen a ghost. "Mason," she said, her voice shaky. "What are you doing out here?" "Did you hear what she said?" I nodded, slow and heavy, not trusting myself to speak yet. Sadie's mouth opened, then closed, like she didn't know what to say either. She glanced back toward the crowd, where Camille was still laughing with her friends, Julian at her side. "I don't understand," Sadie whispered, stepping closer. "She told me you were coming tonight. She said you'd be here for her." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "Guess she forgot to mention the part where I'm not her husband anymore," I said, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. Sadie's eyes darted between me and the auditorium, and I could see her trying to make sense of it. Same as me. She'd always been a good kid, 22 now, but still the same sweet girl who'd crashed on our couch when she needed a break from their mom. She'd seen me pay the bills, cook the dinners, keep the lights on while Camille studied. She knew the truth. "I'll talk to her," Sadie said, turning like she was about to march back in there. I grabbed her arm, gentle but firm. "Don't," I said. "Let her have her moment. I just need to know what's real." Before Sadie could argue, I heard Camille's voice again, louder this time, drifting out as the doors opened for someone else. "Mason?" "Oh, he's just a friend who helped me out when times were tough," she said, casual as if she were talking about borrowing a pen. My stomach dropped, and Sadie's head whipped around, her jaw tight. "A friend," she muttered, looking at me like she couldn't believe it either. I forced a shrug, even though it felt like my chest was caving in. "Guess that's what I am now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But inside, I was breaking. 6 years of my life, reduced to just a friend. Every late night, every skip meal, every time I told her, "You've got this, babe," it was all nothing to her now. I peeked through the crack in the door, watching her. She was surrounded by her med school crew, smart, polished people who probably never had grease under their nails. Julian stood there, smirking like he owned the room, and next to him was a woman in a white coat, older, with sharp eyes, probably Dr. Simone Arnett, Camille's big shot mentor. They were all nodding, smiling, eating up her story. And then there was me, out here in the hallway, invisible. Sadie grabbed my hand, squeezing it tight. "She's wrong, Mason. You're not just a friend. You're everything she's not saying." Her voice cracked, and I could tell she was mad at Camille, mad at the lie. I wanted to believe her, but all I could feel was the weight of being erased. I let go of Sadie's hand and stepped back, my head spinning. "I need air," I said, turning toward the exit. She called after me, but I kept walking, my boots echoing in the empty hall. Outside, the night was crisp, the stars hidden by city lights. I leaned against the building, sucking in deep breaths, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do next. Part of me wanted to storm back in there, grab the mic, and tell everyone the truth, how I'd pawned my granddad's watch for her first semester, how I'd worked through fevers and exhaustion just to keep her in school. But what would that get me? A room full of pity? I didn't want their pity. I wanted my wife back. I wanted the life we'd planned, the one where we'd celebrate this together, not with me standing out here like some stranger. I rubbed my face, my hands rough against my skin, and thought about Julian. Who was he? Some rich guy she'd met at school? A doctor? A lawyer? He didn't look like he'd ever lifted anything heavier than a briefcase. And yet, she'd picked him to stand beside her, to take my place. My mind flashed to the time she'd come home late, saying she'd been studying with friends. Had he been one of them? Had she been building this other life right under my nose? I kicked the wall, the thud loud in the quiet, and cursed under my breath. I'd trusted her. I'd loved her. And now I was nothing to her, just a shadow she'd stepped over on her way to something better. Sadie's words stuck with me, though. You're everything she's not saying. Maybe she was right. Maybe Camille could rewrite our story for her fancy friends, but she couldn't erase the truth. I'd been there. Every step, every dollar, every tear. I wasn't just a friend. I was the man who'd held her up when she couldn't stand on her own. And as I stood there, the cold sinking into my bones, I realized something. I didn't need her to say it. I knew who I was. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her lie be the end of me. Not tonight. Not ever. I sat in my truck in the parking garage, the engine off, the keys dangling in my hand, just staring at the concrete wall ahead. The graduation ceremony was still buzzing in my head, Camille's voice, that guy Julian, the way she'd smiled like I didn't exist. My chest felt tight, like someone had parked a car on it, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I'd walked out of that hallway with Sadie's words ringing in my ears, but now, alone in the dark, all I could hear was Camille saying, Mason, he's just a friend. Just a friend. 6 years of my life, and that's what I got. I wanted to hit something, to scream, to make sense of it, but instead, I just sat there, the silence pressing in around me like a weight I couldn't shake. The garage was dim, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead, casting shadows that danced across the dashboard. I'd parked here hours ago, full of pride, thinking I'd be driving home with my wife, the doctor, laughing about how we'd made it through. Now, I didn't even know where home was anymore. My phone buzzed in my pocket, probably Sadie checking on me, but I didn't look. I couldn't face her pity right now, or anyone's. I needed answers, and the only person who could give them to me was Camille. I'd seen her head toward the garage with Julian and her friends, all of them chattering like they were on top of the world. I'd waited, not sure why, until the crowd thinned out. Maybe I wanted her to see me, to remember I was still here. Maybe I just wanted to know how she could do this. I spotted her then, walking across the lot, her heels clicking on the pavement. Julian was with her, his arm around her waist, and they were heading for a sleek black car that looked like it cost more than I'd made in a year. My stomach twisted, but I pushed the door open and stepped out, my boots loud against the ground. Camille, I called, my voice rough, echoing off the concrete. She stopped, her head snapping toward me, and for a second, I saw something flicker in her eyes, shock, maybe guilt. Julian turned too, his eyebrows lifting like he was surprised I could talk. Mason, she said, her tone sharp, like I'd interrupted something important. What are you doing here? I took a step closer, my hands clenched at my sides. What am I doing here? I came to see my wife graduate. You know, the one I've been supporting for 6 years. My voice was louder than I meant it to be, but I didn't care. She flinched, glancing at Julian, then back at me. Mason, this isn't the time, she said, smoothing her hair like she could brush me off that easy. I've got people waiting. We can talk later. Later? After she'd just called some other guy her husband in front of everyone? I laughed, short and bitter, and it sounded wrong in the empty garage. No, Camille. We're talking now. Who the hell is this guy? I jerked my head toward Julian, who straightened up, his jaw tight like he was ready to step in. Camille's face hardened, and she crossed her arms. This is Julian. My husband. I thought you'd figured that out by now. Her words hit me like a slap, cold and final, and I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. But she just stood there, her chin up, like she was daring me to argue. Your husband? I said, my voice cracking. Since when? Last I checked, I was the one you married. I was the one paying for all this. I waved a hand toward her gown, her fancy life. 6 years, Camille. I worked 3 jobs so you could stand on that stage tonight. And now you're telling me I'm nothing? She sighed, loud and dramatic, like I was the one being unreasonable. Mason, don't make this a scene. You were never part of this world. I couldn't have them thinking I came from nothing. Julian, he gets it. He's in this with me. Her words cut deeper than I thought they could, each one slicing through the years I'd spent believing in us. Nothing? I repeated, stepping closer, my voice low and shaking. I gave up everything for you. My granddad's watch, my weekends, my health gone, so you could have this. And you're standing there telling me I'm nothing? Julian moved then, putting a hand on her shoulder like he was protecting her from me. Look, man, he said, his voice smooth and smug. She's made her choice. You need to let it go. I turned on him, my fist itching to wipe that smirk off his face. You don't get to talk to me. I snapped. You don't know what I've been through for her. He raised his hands, backing off a step, but his eyes said he wasn't scared, just annoyed, like I was a bug he wanted to flick away. Camille stepped between us, her face cold now. Mason, stop. You've done a lot, okay? I'm grateful. You supported me when I needed it. But Julian's my future. He's where I'm going. You wouldn't understand the pressure I'm under. Pressure? I almost laughed again, but it caught in my throat. Pressure, I said, my voice rising. You think I don't know pressure? Try working 16 hours a day, coming home to a cold bed, eating ramen so you could have steak with your study group. I lived pressure so you wouldn't have to. And now you're throwing it back in my face. She didn't answer, just looked away, her lips pressed tight. Julian shifted, checking his watch like I was wasting his time. That's when it hit me. She wasn't even sorry. She'd planned this, maybe not from the start, but somewhere along the way. She'd decided I wasn't good enough, and she'd found someone who fit her new life better. I took a deep breath, forcing my hands to unclench. You're right, I said, quieter now, the fight draining out of me. I don't understand. I don't get how you can look at me and say that after everything. She met my eyes then, and for a second, I thought I saw something, regret. Maybe, but it was gone fast. I'm sorry it's like this, she said, her voice flat. But it's done. Go home, Mason. Go home. Like it was that simple. Like I could just walk away and forget the life I'd built for her. I stared at her, the woman I'd loved, the woman I'd carried, and I didn't recognize her anymore. Yeah, I said finally, turning back to my truck. I'll go. I didn't look back as I climbed in, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of the garage, the tires screeching on the concrete. My hands gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white, and my eyes burned, but I didn't cry. I wouldn't give her that. She'd taken enough from me already. As I hit the open road, the city lights blurring past, I felt something shift inside me. She thought this was the end, that I'd just fade away. But she was wrong. My silence wasn't surrender. It was the start of something else, something she'd never see coming. I didn't know what yet, but I'd figure it out. I always did. I drove home that night with the windows down, the cold air whipping through the truck, trying to clear the fog in my head. Camille's words kept looping in my mind. You were never part of this world, and every time they hit, I felt the sting all over again. My hands gripped the steering wheel, the rough skin of my palms catching on the worn leather, and I couldn't stop thinking about the past 6 years. The truth of it, not her shiny new version. I pulled into the lot of my one-bedroom apartment, the place I'd kept so she could have her fancy condo near campus, and cut the engine. The silence settled in, heavy and thick, and I just sat there, staring at the cracked dashboard, letting the memories flood back. I needed to remember it all, every second I'd given her, because if I didn't, she'd win. She'd rewrite me out of her story, and I'd be left with nothing. It started 6 years ago, when Camille came home from her waitressing job with a wild look in her eyes. Mason, she'd said, dropping her apron on the couch, I want to be a doctor. I know it's crazy, but I can do it. I'd laughed at first, thinking she was joking, but she wasn't. She had this fire in her, this dream she'd buried under years of late shifts and bad tips. I saw how much it meant to her, and I loved her for it. So I said, okay, babe, let's make it happen. I didn't know then what it'd cost me, but I'd have said yes anyway. That's what you do when you love someone. You jump in, even if the water's deep. We sat up all night, figuring it out. She'd need to quit her job, go back to school, take the hard classes first. And money, God, the money. Tuition, books, rent near the university. I told her I'd handle it. I'd make it work. The first semester was the toughest. I was still just a mechanic then, pulling decent hours, but it wasn't enough. I remember the day I took my granddad's watch to the pawn shop, a beat-up old thing he'd worn every day of his life. It wasn't worth much, maybe a couple $100, but it was all I had left of him. The guy behind the counter slid the cash over, and I felt a lump in my throat as I walked out. I didn't tell Camille where the money came from, just handed her the check for her first tuition payment and said, "You're on your way, babe." She hugged me so tight that night, her tears soaking my shirt, and I thought, this is it. This is us. I didn't care about the watch. I cared about her smile. After that, it was all a blur of work. I picked up the warehouse gig, loading boxes until my back screamed, then started driving Uber on weekends when the bills piled up. I come home at dawn sometimes, my eyes half open, and find her asleep on the couch with a textbook across her chest. I'd carry her to bed, her head heavy against my shoulder, and I'd feel this quiet pride. She was doing it, acing her classes, impressing her professors, and I was the one holding it all together. I missed things, though. My buddy's wedding, because I couldn't skip a shift. My mom's funeral, because the flight was too expensive, and Camille had a big exam that week. I told myself it was fine, that family would understand, but it ate at me. I'd sit in the dark sometimes, eating cold leftovers, wondering when I'd get a break. But then Camille would come home, exhausted but happy, and tell me about some test she'd crushed, and I'd think, worth it. The distance started creeping in slow, like rust on a car you don't notice until it's too late. She'd stay late at school, saying she was studying with friends. I'd call, and she'd sound distracted, rushed. "I'm fine, Mason, just busy," she'd say, and I'd let it go. Friends warned me, guys at the shop, my sister, even Sadie once. "She's changing, man," they'd say. "You sure she's still in this?" I'd brush them off. "She's stressed," I'd tell them. "Med school's hard. She needs me to keep it steady." I believed it because I had to. Love made me blind, I guess. I'd see her come home in new clothes, nice stuff I didn't buy, and she'd say it was a gift from a classmate. I'd nod, too tired to push, and keep working. Always working. One night stands out, maybe 2 years in. I'd been sick, fever, chills, the works, but I couldn't miss a shift. Rent was due, and her textbooks weren't cheap. I came home shaking, barely able to stand, and she was there, studying at the table. She looked up, worried, and said, "Mason, you're burning up. Go to bed." I shook my head, said I'd be fine, but she got up, made me soup, sat with me while I ate. She held my hand, her fingers soft against my rough skin, and said, "I couldn't do this without you." I fell asleep with her next to me, thinking we were solid. But looking back, that was one of the last times I felt close to her. After that, she started pulling away, longer nights out, shorter talks, excuses piling up. I told myself it was the pressure, that she'd come back to me when it was over. I was wrong. I snapped out of it, back in my truck, the memories fading into the dark. My hands were cold now, the keys digging into my palm. I'd given her everything, my time, my money, my heart, and she'd taken it all, then handed it to someone else. I thought about that condo I'd paid for, the one I'd never lived in because it was closer to campus. I'd stayed in this dump, with its thin walls and leaky roof, so she could have something better. I'd skipped meals, worked through pain, let my own life shrink down to nothing, all for her. And now she was standing there with Julian, saying I didn't fit her world. Like I was some dirty secret she'd outgrown. I climbed out of the truck, slamming the door hard enough to make the frame shake, and trudged up the stairs to my apartment. The place smelled like motor oil and stale coffee, the way it always did. I dropped onto the couch, staring at the ceiling, and felt the anger settle in deep. Not just at her, but at myself. I'd let this happen. I'd ignored the signs, the warnings, because I loved her too much to see the truth. But not anymore. I sat up, my jaw tight, and looked around at the life I'd let slip away. The pawned watch, the missed moments, the years I'd poured into her, they were gone. But I wasn't. I was still here, still breathing, still me. She could have her new world, her new husband. I'd find my own way back. Not for her, not for anyone else, just for me. And that was enough for now. I stood outside that swanky downtown venue, my hands stuffed in the pockets of a suit I'd never worn before, watching the lights spill out onto the street. It was Camille and Julian's engagement party. Yeah, they moved fast, and I wasn't supposed to be here. The invitation hadn't come my way, not that I expected it to. I'd heard about it from Sadie, who'd called me up, her voice tight with anger, saying, "She's acting like you never existed, Mason. It's not right." I didn't plan to show up, not at first. I'd spent the last few days after the graduation trying to keep my head down, fixing cars, loading boxes, driving strangers around, anything to keep my mind off her. But something in me wouldn't let it go. Not revenge, not exactly. I just needed them to know I wasn't invisible. So there I was, in a suit I'd bought years ago for a wedding we never had, holding an envelope that felt heavier than it should have. The place was packed, fancy cars lined up, people in dresses and ties laughing like money grew on trees. I could hear music drifting out, some soft jazz thing that didn't fit my world. My boots felt loud on the pavement as I walked up, the doorman eyeing me like I was lost. "Name?" he asked, flipping through a clipboard. "Mason Reed," I said, keeping my voice steady. He frowned, scanning the list, then shook his head. "You're not on here." I nodded, like I'd expected that, and said, "I won't be long. Just dropping something off." He hesitated, then shrugged and waved me in. I guess I didn't look like trouble. Not yet, anyway. Inside, it was all gold and glass, chandeliers sparkling overhead, waiters weaving through with trays of tiny food I couldn't name. I spotted Camille right away, glowing in a white dress that hugged her like it was made for her. Julian was next to her, his arm around her waist, talking to some older couple who looked like they owned half the city. His parents, probably. Her med school friends were there too, clinking glasses, and a couple of young guys with cameras, maybe media interns, snapping pictures. I stood by the wall for a minute, taking it in, feeling the weight of that envelope in my hand. It wasn't anger driving me now. It was something quieter, something I couldn't name. I just knew I had to do this. I started across the room, my steps slow but sure, and I saw Camille's head turn. Her eyes locked on mine, and her smile faltered, just for a second. She whispered something to Julian, who glanced my way, his face tightening. I didn't stop. People parted around me, their chatter fading as they noticed something was off. I reached the little stage where a mic stood, probably for speeches later, and I stepped up, tapping it once. The sound cut through the room, sharp and loud, and every head turned. Camille's face went pale, and Julian took a step forward, like he might stop me. Too late. I pulled the envelope out and held it up, my voice calm but firm. Evening, everyone. I'm Mason Reed. You don't know me, but I've got a story to tell. I opened the envelope and slid out the papers, bank statements, tuition receipts, a spreadsheet I'd spent hours putting together. 6 years ago, I said, looking out at the crowd, my wife, Camille, decided she wanted to be a doctor. I told her I'd make it happen. And I did. I held up the first sheet. This is every dollar I paid. $220,000 and change. Textbooks, rent, tuition. I worked 3 jobs, mechanic, warehouse loader, Uber driver. I pawned my granddad's watch, skipped meals, missed my mom's funeral, all so she could stand here tonight. The room was dead quiet now, just the hum of the mic and the rustle of paper. I glanced at Camille. She was frozen, her hands clenched, and kept going. I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because I loved her. But a few days ago, at her graduation, she introduced this guy. I nodded at Julian, as her husband. Said I was just a friend who helped out. So I figured you all deserve the truth. I flipped through the pages, letting them see the numbers, the dates, the proof. Every cent I made, I gave her. I lived in a one-room dump, so she could have a condo downtown. I worked through fevers, 16-hour days, because I believed in her dream. And now she's here, celebrating with you, and I'm not even a name on the list. I paused, letting it sink in, then looked straight at Camille. I may not be the man beside her today, but I'm the reason she ever made it here. That's all I came to say. I set the papers down on the podium, stepped off the stage, and started for the door. The silence broke, then gasps, whispers, a few claps I didn't expect. I didn't look back. I heard her voice as I reached the exit. Mason, wait. But I kept walking. Outside, the air hit me cold and sharp, and I sucked it in deep, my heart pounding. I'd done it. Not to hurt her, not to ruin her night, just to stand up for myself. My truck was parked a block away, and I was halfway there when Sadie caught up, her heels clacking on the sidewalk. Mason, that was insane, she said, breathless, her eyes wide. You okay? I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. They're freaking out in there, she went on. Camille's panicking, Julian's pissed. You shook them up. I shrugged, kicking a pebble across the street. Didn't do it for them, I said. Did it for me. She grabbed my arm, stopping me. You didn't have to, you know. You could have let her have her lie. I looked at her, the streetlights catching her worried face, and shook my head. No, I couldn't. She doesn't get to erase me, Sadie. Not after everything. She nodded, slow, like she got it, and let go. What now? She asked. I didn't have an answer, not really. Go home, I guess, I said, turning toward my truck. Figure it out tomorrow. She watched me go, and I could feel her eyes on my back as I climbed in and started the engine. Driving away, the city lights blurred past, and I felt lighter than I had in days. Not happy, not yet, just unburdened. I'd laid it all out, every sacrifice, every dollar, and they couldn't unhear it. Camille's world might have cracked a little tonight, but mine didn't. I'd stood there, in my cheap suit and scuffed boots, and told the truth. Not her truth, not Julian's, mine. And as the road stretched out ahead, dark and quiet, I realized something. I didn't need their applause or her apology. I'd taken back what she tried to steal, my story, my worth. It wasn't much, not compared to their fancy party, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. I woke up the next morning with my head pounding, the kind of ache that comes from too little sleep and too much thinking. My apartment was quiet, the early light sneaking through the blinds, hitting the empty coffee mug on the table. I'd barely slept after the engagement party, just sat on the couch, staring at nothing, replaying what I'd done. Walking into that room, taking the mic, spilling 6 years of my life for strangers to hear, it felt like a dream, something I'd watched someone else do. But it was real. The envelope was gone, left on that podium, and so was the weight I'd been carrying. I didn't know what would happen next, but I'd lit a match, and now I could feel the heat. I dragged myself to the kitchen, brewed some coffee, and tried to shake the fog. My phone buzzed on the counter, Sadie again, probably checking in. I ignored it for now, needing a minute to breathe. The TV was on low, some morning news show, and I was halfway through my first sip when I heard it. Local man's speech at engagement party goes viral. My stomach dropped, and I turned up the volume, staring at the screen. There I was, grainy footage from someone's phone, standing on that stage with my papers in hand. I worked 3 jobs. I'm the reason she ever made it here. My voice crackled through the speakers. The anchor cut in, saying, Mason Reed's story of sacrifice has sparked a firestorm online, with thousands sharing his words. I sank onto the couch, the mug warm in my hands, watching my life spill out for the world to see. It didn't take long for things to spiral. By noon, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing texts, calls, voicemails from numbers I didn't know. Sadie finally got through, her voice fast and excited. Mason, you're everywhere. People are losing it over this. Camille's freaking out, she called me crying, saying it's a PR nightmare. I rubbed my face, trying to process it. What's she saying? I asked, my throat dry. Sadie hesitated, then said, she's trying to spin it. Told her friends you exaggerated, that it wasn't all you. But no one's buying it. Not after those receipts. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, and muttered, good. I didn't want her tears or her excuses. I just wanted the truth to stick. The day got weirder from there. I went to the shop, figuring work would keep my head straight, but the guys were already on it. You're famous, Reed. My buddy Tony yelled, waving his phone. Look at this, unsung hero of med school. That's you, man. I shrugged it off, grabbing my tools, but inside, my chest tightened. I'd only meant to stand up for myself, not start some circus. Customers started asking about it too, guys dropping off cars, saying, heard you on the news, Mason. Hell of a story. I kept my answers short, focusing on oil changes and brake pads, but it followed me. By the time I clocked out, my voicemail was full, reporters, mostly, wanting interviews. I deleted them all. I wasn't here for their headlines. That night, Sadie showed up at my place, her eyes bright with something I hadn't seen in her before, pride, maybe. You need to see this, she said, shoving her phone at me. It was a post from one of Camille's med school friends, some guy named Derek. I lived with Camille and Mason for a month, it read. He's not lying. He worked himself to death for her. She's full of it. Sadie grinned. He's not the only one. People are talking, her classmates, old neighbors. They're backing you up. I scrolled through, seeing more tweets, comments, even a video from a girl who'd worked with Camille at the diner. Mason was the real deal, she said. Camille's acting like he didn't exist, but we all saw it. I handed the phone back, my jaw tight. Didn't expect this, I said. Sadie nodded. Neither did she. The next day, it got bigger. I was at the warehouse, hauling boxes, when my boss pulled me aside. You got a call, he said, handing me his phone. It was Dr. Simone Arnett, Camille's mentor, the one I'd seen at the graduation. Her voice was calm, professional. Mr. Reed, I owe you an apology. I didn't know the full story. What Camille did, it's disappointing. I stood there, sweat dripping down my back, not sure what to say. Oh, thanks, I managed. She kept going. I saw the papers you left. It's impressive, what you did. If you ever need legal advice, I know people. No charge. I mumbled something about appreciating it and hung up, my head spinning. Legal advice? I didn't want to fight. I just wanted peace. But peace wasn't coming easy. Camille's world was cracking, and I could feel it even from where I stood. Sadie told me later that Julian's parents were furious, something about their family name getting dragged through the mud. Her med school friends were whispering, pulling back, and her mentors were asking questions. I didn't care about ruining her, but I wasn't sorry either. She'd built her castle on my back, then kicked me out the gate. Now the walls were shaking, and she had no one to blame but herself. I kept waiting for the anger to hit me again, but it didn't. Instead, something strange started happening. People thanked me. It started small. A guy at the gas station clapped me on the shoulder, said, "Heard your story, man. Respect." Then a lady at the grocery store, older, with tired eyes, stopped me. "You remind me of my husband," she said. "He worked like that for me too. Don't let her take that from you." I nodded, awkward, not used to this. But it kept coming, notes left on my truck, messages online, even a kid at the shop who said, "You're like a superhero, mister." I didn't feel like one. I felt tired, raw, like I'd been scraped clean. But those words, they stuck. They built something in me I hadn't expected. By the end of the week, I was sitting on my couch again, the TV off, just listening to the quiet. My phone buzzed, another message, this time from a local reporter asking for a sit-down. I deleted it, same as the others. I didn't need their cameras. What I needed was to figure out what this meant for me, not her. I'd thrown my truth out there, and it had landed hard, but it wasn't about revenge. It was about standing up, being seen. And now people were seeing me, not just as Camille's shadow, but as Mason Reed, the guy who didn't quit. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and let that settle. The world could keep spinning, Camille could keep scrambling. I'd done my part. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe, like the air was mine again, not hers. And that was enough to keep me going. I was tightening a bolt on a rusty old Chevy at the shop when Tony slapped a newspaper on the workbench, grinning like he'd won something. "Check it out, Reed," he said, pointing at the headline, "The man who funded a doctor's dream, then got erased." My name was right there, in big black letters, next to a blurry picture of me from the engagement party, holding up those papers. I wiped my hands on a rag, my stomach doing a flip, and picked it up. Local mechanic Mason Reed's story of sacrifice has captured hearts. It started, and I skimmed the rest, words like inspiration and resilience jumping out at me. I tossed it back on the bench, shaking my head. "Didn't ask for this," I muttered. But Tony just laughed. "Too late, man. You're a hero now." I didn't feel like a hero. I felt exposed, like someone had ripped open my life and put it on display. The shop was busier than usual that day, guys dropping off cars, lingering to shake my hand, saying stuff like, "Heard about you, Mason. Hell of a thing you did." I nodded, kept my answers short, and focused on the work. Wrenches and oil I could handle. This spotlight stuff was new, and I wasn't sure I liked it. But it didn't stop. By lunch, my phone was buzzing again, Sadie this time, saying, "You see the article? It's gone viral, Mason. People love you." I grunted, chewing on a sandwich, and told her, "I just want to fix cars, not be some poster boy." She laughed, but I could hear the pride in her voice. "Too bad. You're stuck with it." The next day, it got real. I was at the community center near my place, dropping off some old tools for their shop class, when a guy in a suit came up to me. "Mason Reed?" he asked, sticking out his hand. "Name's Carl. I run a blue-collar heroes panel, heard of it?" I hadn't, but I shook his hand anyway, my grip firm from years of work. "We talk about guys like you," he said, "people who keep the world running. That speech you gave? We'd love you to speak at our next event." I stared at him, my mouth dry. "I'm not a speaker," I said, shifting my weight. "I just said what I had to." He smiled, like he'd heard that before. "That's why we want you. It's real. Think about it." He handed me a card and walked off, leaving me standing there, the tools heavy in my hands. I thought about it all day, through my shift at the warehouse, through the Uber runs that night. Me, on a stage again, talking to a room full of strangers. It wasn't my thing. I liked quiet, the hum of an engine, the feel of a wrench turning. But something about Carl's words stuck. Guys like me, keeping the world running. I'd spent years running for Camille, and now people saw me for it. Not her, not Julie and me. I called him back that night, my voice steady. "I'll do it," I said. "But I'm not fancy. I'll just tell it like it is." He laughed. "That's perfect." The panel was a week later, at a big hall downtown. I showed up in my best jeans and a clean shirt. No suit this time felt more like me. The room was full, maybe 100 people, all working types, truckers, builders, factory guys. I sat on a folding chair, listening to the others talk, stories of long hours, family struggles, quiet wins. Then it was my turn. I stepped up, the mic heavy in my hand, and looked out at them. "I'm Mason," I said, my voice rough but clear. I'm a mechanic. Worked 3 jobs for 6 years so my wife could be a doctor. She made it, then told everyone I was just a friend. I showed up at her engagement party with the receipts, $220,000 worth. Not to hurt her, but to say I was there. I paused, the room dead quiet. I'm not special. Just a guy who did what he had to. If that's a hero, then we all are. They clapped, loud, real claps, not the polite kind from Camille's crowd. A few guys stood, nodding, and I felt my face heat up. I sat down quick, my heart pounding, but it wasn't bad. It was good. After, people came up, shook my hand, told me their own stories. One guy, older, with a limp, said, I worked doubles for my kid's school. Wife left too. You're not alone, son. I nodded, throat tight, and realized he was right. I wasn't alone. This was bigger than me now. Things kept moving after that. My side hustle, fixing cars out of my garage, picked up. Local guys started calling, saying, heard you're the real deal, Mason. Can you look at my truck? Then a couple of them, small business owners, showed up with an offer. We'll back you, they said. Get a real shop going. You've got something people trust. I didn't say yes right away, money's tight, and I'm careful, but I didn't say no either. It was a chance, one I hadn't seen coming. Then, out of nowhere, a doctor from the clinic where Camille used to intern called. Saw your story, he said. I'm building a program, health care for working families. Need a consultant who gets it. You in? I laughed, surprised. I'm no doctor, I said. He chuckled. Don't need to be. You know the grind. That's enough. I took the gig part-time. Nothing big, but it paid. I'd sit with him, talk about what guys like me need, cheap checkups, late hours, no fancy nonsense. It felt good, useful. My name was starting to mean something, not because of her, but because of me. People stopped me on the street now, cops, welders, moms with tired eyes, all saying, keep going, Mason. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I nodded, kept moving. The shop idea grew too. Those investors pushed, and I started sketching plans on napkins, late at night when the world was quiet. One evening, I was at the community center again, tinkering with an old engine for the kids' class, when Sadie showed up. You're different, she said, leaning on the workbench. Calmer, stronger. I shrugged, wiping grease off my hands. Maybe, I said, just figuring it out. She smiled soft. They're calling you a blue-collar legend online. Camille hates it. I snorted, shaking my head. Let her hate it. I'm not doing this for her. Sadie nodded, and we stood there, the engine humming between us. I didn't need Camille's stage anymore. I had my own, small, rough, real. The spotlight had turned, and I wasn't running from it. I was standing in it, on my terms, and it felt like mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't just the guy behind someone else. I was Mason Reed, and that was enough. I was elbow deep in a transmission at the shop when my phone buzzed in my pocket, the third time that morning. I wiped my hands on a rag, figuring it was Sadie or maybe another reporter who wouldn't quit, and pulled it out. It was a text from an unknown number. Mason, it's Camille. We need to talk. Please. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the screen, feeling that old ache creep up my chest. I hadn't heard from her since the engagement party, not directly, just whispers through Sadie about her scrambling to save face. Part of me wanted to delete it, let her stew in whatever mess she'd made. But another part, the part that still remembered her asleep in my arms, wouldn't let me. I typed back, slow and careful. What's there to say? She replied fast. I never thought you'd actually leave. I set the phone down, my jaw tight, and went back to the car. I didn't know her an answer. Not anymore. The next few days, I kept busy, shop work, warehouse shifts, meetings with the doctor about that clinic program. But her message stuck with me, nagging like a loose bolt I couldn't tighten. I didn't want to care, but I did. Then Sadie called, her voice low. Mason, it's getting rough for her. She's up for some big fellowship, and the hospital board's digging into your story. Julian's backing off too. His family's pissed about the publicity. I leaned against my truck, the sun hot on my neck, and sighed. Not my problem, I said, but it didn't feel true. I'd started this, whether I meant to or not. She's texting me, I admitted. Sadie went quiet, then said, what did she say? I told her, and she snorted. She's scared, Mason. She's losing everything she built, and now she's looking back. Don't let her pull you in. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I won't, I said and hung up. A week later, I got a call from a lawyer, some guy named Harris, voice smooth like he charged by the hour. "Mr. Reed," he said, "I've been following your situation. You've got a case for spousal repayment, 6 years of support, documented. Could be a big payout." I was in my kitchen, stirring instant coffee, and I stopped cold. "A case," I said. "Like sewer." He went on, all business, legal terms, percentages, how I'd invested in her career. I cut him off. "I didn't do it for money. I did it for her." Harris paused, then said, "Fair enough. But she's reaping the rewards, and you're not. Think it over." He left his number, and I sat there, the coffee going cold, staring at the wall. Sue her? Drag her through court? Make her pay me back? It didn't sit right. She'd taken enough from me. I didn't want her debt too. Meanwhile, the world kept turning. My shop was picking up. Those investors pushed me to sign a lease on a bigger space, and I was fixing more cars than I could count. The clinic gig was steady too, real work, helping guys like me get checkups without breaking the bank. People still stopped me, said my story kept them going, and I'd nod, awkward but grateful. But Camille's reckoning was happening, and I couldn't ignore it. Sadie told me the hospital board called her in, a review meeting for that fellowship. She had to explain it all, Sadie said over the phone. Your speech, the receipts, how she played it off. They're not happy. I pictured her in some sterile room, facing suits with stern faces, and felt a twinge, not pity, not quite, but something close. She'll figure it out, I said. She's smart. Sadie huffed. Smart doesn't fix this. I heard later, through the grapevine, that Julian was gone. His parents pulled him back, didn't want their name tied to her mess. Sponsors dropped her too. Some big grant she'd been chasing fell through. I didn't cheer, didn't gloat. It wasn't my win to celebrate. I'd said my piece, and the fallout was hers to carry. But that text kept gnawing at me. I never thought you'd actually leave. Like she'd expected me to stay quiet and loyal while she built her new life. I didn't reply, didn't plan to. She'd made her choice, and I'd made mine. Still, it lingered, a loose thread I couldn't cut. One night, I was at the community center, tinkering with an old bike for the kids' class, when Sadie showed up. She's not getting the fellowship, she said, leaning on the workbench. Board's holding off, reputation concerns, they called it. I kept my eyes on the chain, adjusting it slow. She'll bounce back, I said, my voice flat. Sadie crossed her arms. Maybe, but she's alone now. Julian's out, her friends are quiet. She's feeling it. I nodded, not sure what to say. You think she deserves it? Sadie asked, her tone sharp. I set the wrench down, wiping my hands. I don't know, I said. Not my call. She'll have to carry her debt differently, not in cash, but in her head. That's worse. Sadie watched me, her eyes searching. You're not mad anymore, she said, more statement than question. I shrugged. Mad doesn't fix it. I said what I needed to. Rest is on her. She nodded, slow, and we sat there, the hum of the fluorescent lights filling the silence. I didn't hate Camille not anymore. I'd loved her once, poured everything into her, and she'd thrown it away. But that was her burden now, not mine. I'd walked away, not to destroy her, but to save myself. And I had. The lawyer called again a few days later, pushing the case. Last chance, Mason, he said. She's vulnerable now, perfect time to strike. I cut him off. No, I said, firm. I'm done fighting her. Let her live with it. He sighed, like I was a fool, and hung up. I didn't care. Money wouldn't give me back those years, wouldn't erase her words. I'd rather build something new than claw at her ruins. The shop lease was signed that week, my name on the door, Reed's Auto, in bold letters. The clinic program grew too, more families coming in, thanking me for keeping it real. I was moving forward, not looking back. That night, I sat on my couch, the TV off, just listening to the quiet. Camille's text glowed in my mind, but I didn't touch my phone. She'd never thought I'd leave because she'd never seen me, really seen me. I'd been her rock, her bank, her shadow, and she'd assumed I'd stay that way. But I wasn't that guy anymore. I was Mason Reed, mechanic, consultant, the guy who'd stood up and walked away. She'd face her reckoning, alone or not, and I'd face mine, building a life that was mine, not hers. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and let it go. The past was hers to carry. The future? That was mine. And it felt solid, like something I could hold on to, something real. I stood on the stage at the grand opening of Forge, my hands shoved in my pockets, the crowd buzzing below me like a hive I'd stirred up. It was a year since that night in the parking garage, A year since Camille tore my world apart, and here I was, 36, still a mechanic, but something more now. The building behind me was brick and steel, nothing fancy, but it was mine. Forge wasn't just a repair shop, it was a mentorship center, a place for young guys like I'd been to learn a trade, fix a car, build a life. The sign above the door read, Forge, strength through work, and I'd picked every word myself. Local entrepreneurs flanked me, guys who'd invested after my story went viral, along with Sadie, who'd taken on the community coordinator role. I looked out at the faces, kids, parents, neighbors, and felt my chest tighten, not with nerves, but with something I hadn't felt in years, pride. The mic was in my hand, and I cleared my throat, the sound sharp over the speakers. "I'm Mason Reed," I said, my voice steady, rough from a long day. A year ago, I was working 3 jobs, trying to hold up someone else's dream. It didn't work out, but I didn't stop. This place, Forge, it's for guys who don't stop either. You don't need a degree to make something of yourself. You need grit, hands that work, and a chance. That's what we're here for. The crowd clapped, loud and real, and I stepped back, letting Sadie take over with the details, classes, schedules, all the stuff she was better at. I watched her, her dark hair bouncing as she talked, and thought about how she'd stuck by me when no one else did. She'd seen the truth back then, and now she was here, building this with me. The day was a blur after that, ribbon cutting, handshakes, kids running around the shop, touching tools like they were toys. I showed a group of them how to change a tire, my hands moving slow so they could follow, and their eyes lit up like I'd handed them gold. One kid, maybe 16, skinny with a chipped tooth, said, "You're the guy from the video, right? The one who didn't quit." I nodded, wiping grease off my fingers. "Yeah, that's me." He grinned. "Cool." I didn't feel cool, I felt tired, worn, but his words stuck. People still talked about that speech, the receipts, the way I'd walked out of Camille's life. Online, it was a legend now, but to me, it was just the day I stopped being her shadow. Later, I was in the back office, sorting through some paperwork, when Sadie came in with a letter. "Mail for you," she said, tossing it on the desk. The handwriting was familiar, Camille's, and my stomach flipped. I hadn't heard from her since that text months ago, the one I never answered. I picked it up, the paper thin in my hands, and hesitated. "You gonna read it?" Sadie asked, leaning on the doorframe. I shrugged. "Maybe." She rolled her eyes but didn't push, leaving me alone with it. I tore it open, my pulse loud in my ears, and started reading. It was long, messy, her words spilling over the page like she'd written it in a rush. "Mason," it began, "I've been trying to find the right way to say this. I'm sorry, not just for what I did, but for who I became. I lost myself in that world, and I lost you. I see it now. Everything you gave me, everything I took. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just hope you're proud of who you are." I set it down, my hands steady, and stared at the wall. Proud of who I was. I thought about that, about the years I'd spent breaking myself for her, the nights I'd come home to nothing, the way she'd erased me. And then I thought about now, the shop humming outside, the kids learning, the life I'd built from the wreckage. Yeah, I was proud. Not because of her apology, but because I'd made it here without her. I folded the letter, slid it into a drawer, and didn't write back. She didn't ask me to. She didn't ask for anything, just left it there, like a weight she needed to drop. I let her have that. It wasn't mine to carry anymore. The rest of the day went smooth, more tours, more thanks from parents who said, "This is what my boy needs." One guy, a welder with rough hands like mine, pulled me aside. "Heard your story," he said. "Built something like this myself once. Keep it up." I nodded, grateful, and watched him go. The investors were happy too, talking expansion already, maybe a second location. I didn't say much, just listened, letting it sink in. This wasn't just a fluke. It was real, growing, mine. Sadie caught me later, grinning. "You're a natural at this," she said. "Bossing people around, teaching kids." I snorted. "Hardly. Just doing what I know." She shook her head. "It's more than that. You're giving them what you didn't have." That night, after everyone left, I locked up and stood in the empty shop, the smell of oil and metal thick in the air. The tools were lined up, the floor swept, everything in its place. I ran my hand over a workbench, feeling the dents and scratches, and thought about Camille's letter. She'd seen it, my strength, my worth, but too late. I didn't need her to tell me now. I saw it myself, and the kids who'd hung on my every word, in the space I'd carved out. I'd spent years chasing her dream, thinking it was ours, but this was mine. No degrees, no fancy suits, just me and what I could do with my hands. I drove home under a dark sky, the truck rumbling steady, and felt the quiet settle in. Not the heavy kind I'd known before, but a good kind, a full kind. The next day, I'd be back at Forge, teaching, fixing, building. Sadie would be there, keeping it all together, and the kids would show up, eager and loud. It wasn't perfect, money was tight, hours were long, but it was enough. More than enough. I pulled into my lot, cut the engine, and sat there, the letter flickering in my mind. I hope you're proud, she'd written. I was. Not for her, not because of her, but for me. I'd forged something out of nothing, and it stood strong. I climbed out, the night cool against my skin, and headed inside. The apartment was still small, still rough, but it didn't feel empty anymore. I kicked off my boots, dropped onto the couch, and closed my eyes. Tomorrow was another day, another chance to keep going, to show those kids what I'd learned the hard way. You don't need someone else's stage to shine. I'd found mine, built it from the ground up, and it was solid. That was my win, quiet and real, and no one could take it from me. Not her, not anyone. I was Mason Reed, and I was proud. I stood by the lake at sunset, the water flat and golden, watching a handful of Forge apprentices wrestle with an old boat engine I dragged out here for them to practice on. The air smelled like damp earth and gasoline, a mix that felt right to me, and their voices carried over the quiet, laughs, curses, the clank of tools. I leaned against my truck, arms crossed, letting the breeze cool the sweat on my neck. It had been a long day, teaching a morning class at Forge, fixing a busted radiator at the shop, then hauling this engine out here for the kids. But I wasn't tired, not the way I used to be. This was different. This was peace, the kind that settles deep, not from noise or crowds, but from knowing I was where I belonged. The kids were a mess, grease on their shirts, arguing over a wrench like it was a prize, but they were getting it. One of them, Jake, the skinny 16-year-old with the chipped tooth, looked up and grinned. "Think we got it, Mason," he yelled, cranking the starter. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life, a rough growl that made them all cheer. I nodded, a small smile tugging at my mouth. "Not bad," I called back. "Now take it apart and do it again." They groaned, but they were laughing too, already reaching for the tools. I watched them, my chest full, and thought about how far I'd come. A year ago, I was a ghost in my own life, chasing Camille's dream. Now, I was here, teaching these kids to build their own. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky red, and I took a deep breath, letting it fill me up. This spot by the lake was mine, a place I'd found after everything fell apart, where I'd come to think, to let go. I'd spend hours here over the months, staring at the water, piecing myself back together. I thought about Camille a lot in those early days, her voice, her laugh, the way she looked at me once, like I was her whole world. I'd loved her, hard and deep, and I'd pictured a life with her kids, a house, maybe a dog tearing up the yard. That dream was gone now, scattered like leaves on the wind, but standing here, I didn't miss it. Not anymore. I'd let it go, not with anger, but with a quiet nod to what was. I kicked a rock into the water, watching the ripples spread, and my mind drifted to her letter. It had been weeks since the Forge opening, since I'd read her words, "I hope you're proud," and tucked them away. I hadn't written back, hadn't called. She didn't need me to. She'd said her piece, and I'd taken mine. Sadie told me later that Camille was still in the city, working at a smaller hospital, no fellowship, no Julian. "She's quieter now," Sadie had said, her voice soft. "Like she's figuring it out." I'd nodded, not asking more. Camille's life was hers to live, her mistakes hers to carry. I didn't wish her ill. I never had, but I didn't any. Mine was enough. The kids finished up, the engine in pieces again, and Jake jogged over, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You coming tomorrow?" he asked, eyes bright. "We're doing breaks next, right?" I nodded. "Yeah, I'll be there. Don't be late. You're leading it." His grin widened, and he ran back to the group, yelling something about being the boss. I chuckled, shaking my head. Forge was growing. More kids signing up, more donors pitching in. The shop was steady too, Reed's Auto, a name people trusted. The clinic program kept me busy, helping families like mine had been, working folks who just needed a break. It wasn't big or loud, but it was real, and it fit me like my old boots, worn but solid. I thought about the years I'd given Camille, 6 long ones, every day a grind for her dream. I'd been the man behind the degree, the one who'd carried her to that stage. But now, standing here, I was the man behind my own name. I didn't need her validation, didn't need her to clap for me. The kids' cheers, the hum of a fixed engine, the way Sadie smiled when we locked up Forge, that was my applause. I'd built this life from the ground up, not with fancy words or a sharp suit, but with my hands, my sweat, my stubborn refusal to quit. And it was mine, every dent and scratch of it. The sky darkened, the last light fading, and I called the kids over. "Pack it up," I said, my voice carrying. "Time to head out." They grumbled but got to it, hauling the tools into the truck bed. I helped, lifting the engine with Jake, our shoulders brushing as we worked. "You're good at this," I told him, setting it down. He shrugged, "Shy now. Learned from you." I clapped his back, not saying more. That was enough. We piled into the truck, the kids squeezed in the back, laughing and shoving, and I drove them home, the road dark and familiar. Dropping them off, I watched them scatter, Jake waving, the others yelling goodbyes, and felt that peace again, steady and warm. Back at my place, I parked and climbed the stairs, the night quiet around me. The apartment was the same, small, rough, smelling like oil, but it felt different now. Full somehow. I kicked off my boots, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and dropped onto the couch. The lake lingered in my mind. The water, the kids, the engine's roar. I thought about Camille one last time, not with pain, but with a kind of distance, like looking at an old photo you don't need to keep. She'd been my world once, and I'd given her everything. But she'd taken it and walked away, and I'd found something better. Not her stage, not her spotlight, mine. I took a sip, the cold biting my throat, and leaned back, closing my eyes. Tomorrow, I'd be up early, Forge, the shop, the clinic. More kids to teach, more cars to fix, more people to help. It wasn't glamorous, wasn't loud, but it was real. I didn't need headlines or crowds. I had this. The lake, the work, the quiet win of knowing who I was. Mason Reed, not the man behind her degree, but the man behind his own name. I'd fought for it, built it, earned it. And as the night settled in, I let the past slip away, final and gone. The future was here, in my hands, and it was enough. More than enough. It was mine. I walked in, exhausted from the long day, expecting nothing more than a quiet evening. Instead, I was greeted by an eerie silence, one that didn't belong in my home. My mother, my wife, my sons, and my best friend, Peter, all sat on the couch, their faces unreadable, their eyes avoiding mine. The room felt off. Something was wrong. It wasn't the usual tension that sometimes lingered when I got home late. It wasn't the lingering smell of burnt food from Doris's failed attempts at cooking. It wasn't even the way my son sat stiffly, as if bracing for impact. No, this was something deeper, something deliberate. I set my briefcase down, rolling my shoulders as I tried to read the air. "What's wrong?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain steady. No one spoke immediately. The hesitation sent a ripple of unease down my spine. Then my eldest son, Michael, cleared his throat and said something that I would never forget. "Dad, sit down. You need to accept a new reality. You're not in charge of this family anymore. Uncle Peter is more like a father to us now." The words sliced through me. I blinked, convinced I had misheard. "Excuse me." My voice was calm, too calm for the fire that suddenly roared inside my chest. Michael wouldn't look at me. His fingers drummed against his knee, a nervous tic he had since childhood. But I wasn't focused on him anymore. I was focused on the one person who had every reason to intervene. Doris. She sat there, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her expression unreadable. Not shocked, not apologetic, just neutral. She knew. They all did. My mother shifted slightly, exhaling as if this moment had been inevitable. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't outraged. She was complicit. Peter, my so-called best friend, didn't flinch. His posture remained relaxed, as if this entire thing was just another business meeting. He looked comfortable. Too comfortable. Like he belonged there. Like he had been in my seat for a while. The realization struck like a hammer to the chest. This wasn't new. This wasn't spontaneous. This had been planned. I stared at my sons, hoping, begging, for one of them to break. To hesitate. To show even a flicker of regret. But Michael was resolute. And Eric, my younger son, though less vocal, didn't look away. He didn't deny it. I took a slow, deliberate breath, pushing down the molten rage bubbling beneath my skin. I had spent years mastering the art of control, negotiating with ruthless men in the courtroom, breaking down opposing arguments with precision. But this wasn't a legal battle. This was war, and I had walked into an ambush. Peter is more like a father to you, I repeated, my voice disturbingly even. Michael nodded, his jaw tightening. Yeah. I didn't look at Peter yet. I wasn't ready to acknowledge him. Not yet. Instead, I turned my attention back to Doris. Doris, I said, my voice laced with something sharp, something lethal. Is there anything you'd like to add? For the first time, her composure cracked. She inhaled sharply, smoothing down the fabric of her dress, as if that would erase the weight of her betrayal. She wasn't ready for this conversation. That was my first real victory. I think it's best if we all. I held up a hand. No generic, rehearsed statements. No deflections. Tell me, Doris, when exactly did my role as your husband and their father expire? Was it gradual? Or did you make the decision in a single night while lying in my bed? Her lips parted, but no words came out. That was my second victory. She hadn't expected resistance. She had thought I would either explode or break. Instead, I was calculating. Cold. Controlled. And then, finally, I turned to Peter. Peter, the man I had once trusted with everything. The man who had been there for the birth of my children, who had toasted at my wedding, who had celebrated my victories and grieved my losses. The man I had called a brother. And now, he sat in my house, in my presence, waiting for me to acknowledge that he had won. He was waiting for me to lose control. I smiled. A small, slow, unsettling smile. The kind of smile that made opposing lawyers nervous in the courtroom. Peter's confidence faltered for the first time. And that was my third victory. I exhaled, stepping back, straightening my cuffs like this entire situation was nothing more than an interesting footnote in my evening. The room was suffocating. The walls were closing in. But I wouldn't let them see it. I wouldn't let them have the satisfaction of knowing they had wounded me. Instead, I turned toward the door. You have something to say? Peter finally spoke, his voice smooth, controlled. Cocky. I paused, tilting my head slightly, letting the moment stretch uncomfortably, letting the tension coil. Then I chuckled. A low, knowing chuckle. That was my fourth victory. Without another word, I walked out. Because this wasn't the night I lost. No, this was the night I prepared. And by the time they realized what was coming, it would be far too late. I closed the door behind me and stood in the hallway, listening. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then, a shift, the sound of movement, of relieved exhalations. They thought I was gone. That was my confirmation. They had expected an explosion, a confrontation, a desperate plea for answers. But they didn't understand who I was. I walked down the hall, past the framed family photos that suddenly felt like mockery. Lies frozen in time. The smiling faces. The staged happiness. The illusion of loyalty. My wife. My mother. My sons. And Peter. The betrayal wasn't what stunned me the most. No, it was how normal they made it seem. They had decided. Without me. They had moved on. Without me. I entered my study, shutting the door behind me with the same eerie calm I had maintained in the living room. I sat in my chair, leaning back, my hands folding neatly in front of me. And then I exhaled. The rage sat there, waiting. It wanted to be unleashed. It begged for destruction. I could destroy that living room right now. Flip the table. Shatter the glasses. Drag Peter out by his throat and introduce his smug face to the pavement outside. But violence is short-lived. Pain fades. Bruises heal. Revenge should be permanent. And for that, I needed patience. The pieces fall into place. I had ignored the signs. Not because I was blind, but because I had chosen to trust. My mother's influence had always been strong. Too strong. She had chosen Doris for me. Not directly. Not explicitly. But she had shaped the narrative. Made sure I saw Doris as inevitable. A good wife. A proper woman. Someone who would build a life with me. And she had been right. Doris was all those things. Until she wasn't. Until she decided that being my wife wasn't enough anymore. I leaned forward, my fingers tapping lightly against the desk. Peter. Of all the men in the world, why him? I had considered the possibility of infidelity before. It's an occupational hazard when you're a lawyer. You see too many marriages fall apart, too many betrayals, too many quiet affairs unfolding behind closed doors. I had once convinced myself that if it ever happened to me, I would know, that I would feel it. But I hadn't, because it hadn't been a singular betrayal. It had been a transition, a slow, careful replacement, a planned coup. The mistakes they made. They had miscalculated. They thought my silence meant acceptance. They believed I was too old to fight back, too invested to walk away. But the truth? I was already gone. Not in the physical sense. Not yet. But emotionally, mentally, I had detached. And once a man stops caring, once he stops believing that anything can be salvaged, he becomes dangerous. That was their first mistake. Their second mistake? They assumed I had nothing left to lose. They thought they had taken everything from me. But they forgot. I was a lawyer. And power isn't about emotions. It's about leverage. And I had leverage. More than they could possibly imagine. The plan forms. I pulled my phone from my pocket, scrolling through my contacts. First, I called my financial advisor. James, I said, my voice steady. Effective immediately, I want all funds in our joint accounts frozen. He hesitated. Sir, are you sure? That includes your wife's access. I know exactly what it includes. Understood. Click. First move made. Then, I dialed my lawyer. Stan, I said, my voice even smoother now. I need an expedited divorce filing. Non-negotiable. David. Now Stan. A pause. Then a sigh. I'll have the paperwork ready by morning. Second move made. Then, finally, I called an old friend. Someone who owed me favors. Someone who specialized in ruining people. And with that, the wheels began turning. I sat back, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of my next steps. They thought they had won. They thought I had walked away, licking my wounds. But I wasn't running. I was preparing. And by the time they realized it, it would be too late. The next morning, the storm hit. Not with thunder, not with lightning, but with silence. It started when Doris went to make her usual online transfer, some payment for the house, maybe a casual splurge on one of those expensive boutique items she claimed were necessary purchases. But this time, instead of the transaction going through, the screen blinked red. Transaction declined. She frowned, refreshing the page. Still the same message. She tried again, this time on her phone, switching between accounts. Declined. Doris wasn't stupid. She knew something was wrong. That's when she grabbed her coat, slid into her Mercedes, the one I bought for her birthday, and drove to the bank, where reality finally slapped her in the face. The frozen accounts. Mrs. Landon, the bank manager said, shifting uncomfortably behind his desk. Yes. Doris snapped, already irritated. What's the issue? My account says there's a security hold. I need it removed. The manager hesitated. I'm afraid that won't be possible. Doris narrowed her eyes. And why not? He took a breath, clearly wishing he wasn't the one delivering the news. Because your husband issued a freeze on all joint accounts. His lawyer provided the necessary documents. Legally, we cannot grant you access without his authorization. Doris's breath hitched. That's ridiculous. I have access to these accounts. I have for years. Yes, ma'am, the manager said, nodding politely. And now you don't. A slow horror crept into her eyes. The truth settled in, sinking deep. I had cut her off. Completely. She had never thought I would do it. Not after all these years. Not after everything we built. She thought I would break. But instead, I starved them first. The credit cards declined. By the time Doris left the bank, she was calling Peter, her hands shaking. I imagine the conversation was something like this. Peter, he froze everything. What do we do? But Peter had his own problems. Because as she panicked over the bank, I had moved to phase 2. Her credit cards. While she was storming into her bank branch, I was shutting down every single line of credit she had access to. By the time she tried to use her platinum card at a cafe on her way home, it was declined. She tried another. Declined. Tried the emergency one she kept in her purse. Declined. And that was when the fear truly set in. Peter's business crumbles. While Doris was struggling, Peter was stepping into his own personal nightmare. See, Peter had built his business in large part because of me. Not because he was particularly smart. Not because he was a financial genius. No, because I had pulled strings for him. Because I had gotten him clients. Because I had given him access to the right people, the right investors, the right markets. And now, I was pulling the rug out from under him. One by one, his major investors started backing out. First, the construction firm that had funneled work through him for years suddenly canceled all future contracts. Then the biggest supplier for his company sent a polite but firm email. We regret to inform you that, due to unforeseen circumstances, we are terminating our partnership effective immediately. Peter didn't know it yet, but his business had hours to live. By lunchtime, 2 more investors had walked away. By dinner, the company's cash flow was suffocating. And by the time he checked his own accounts, they were in the red. I hadn't just cut him off from my life. I had cut off his survival. The house of cards collapses. While Doris and Peter were separately falling apart, my sons, Michael and Eric, were about to have their own rude awakening. Because the truth was, they had never really appreciated the life I provided. Everything they had, from their Ivy League tuition to the luxury cars in their driveways, was because of me. And yet, they had turned on me. They had called Peter their father. They had replaced me in their minds before I had even walked out of that house. So I gave them exactly what they wanted. I let them live without me. The first thing to go? Their tuition payments. Michael, who was midway through his master's degree, suddenly got a notice. Your tuition bill is past due. If not paid within 7 days, your enrollment will be suspended. Eric, who had grown used to his carefree lifestyle, found his monthly allowance gone. No warning. No explanation. Just gone. They called their bank. And just like their mother, they were given the same cold answer. Your father has revoked all access to these funds. You no longer have authorization. Panic ensues. By evening, the phone calls began. Doris called. My sons called. Peter called. Even my mother, the woman who raised me, the woman who orchestrated half of this betrayal, called. I didn't answer a single one. Not yet. Not until they had fully realized it. Not until they had felt the loss. Not until they understood, with absolute certainty, that the man they had dismissed, the man they had replaced, was the only reason they had anything in the first place. By nightfall, I imagine they all sat in that same living room. The same room where they had made their decision. Only this time, the air was different. This time, they weren't the ones in control. They were drowning. And I was watching them sink. Peter sat in his office, sipping his usual overpriced coffee, blissfully unaware that his world was collapsing. For years, Peter had built his business on connections. Not hard work. Not intelligence. Connections. And those connections? They were mine. From the moment he started his so-called company, he had leaned on my influence. My clients. My investors. My reputation. And I had helped him. I had built him. Because at the time, he was my best friend. My brother in all but blood. But now, I was going to unmake him. The first blow, the vanishing investors. The first sign of trouble came in the form of an email. Subject, contract termination. Peter skimmed the message, his forehead creasing. Due to unforeseen financial circumstances, we regret to inform you that our ongoing contract with your firm is terminated effective immediately. His jaw tightened. The sender? One of his biggest investors. The one that kept his cash flow steady. He set the phone down, running a hand through his hair, trying to shake off the unease creeping into his bones. This was nothing. A misunderstanding. Something that could be fixed with a phone call. He dialed immediately, forcing a smile when his contact answered. Hey Chris, just saw the email, what's going on? A pause. A long one. Then Chris sighed. Peter, I'm sorry man. I really am. But we can't be involved with you anymore. Peter's fingers tightened around the phone. What? Why? What's changed since last week? A beat of silence. Then, the words that made his stomach drop. David. Everything went cold. What about him? Peter forced out. Chris hesitated again, then lowered his voice. Look, Peter, I don't know what happened between you two, but well, let's just say he's making it clear that doing business with you is a bad move. Peter shot up from his chair, knocking his coffee onto his desk. This is ridiculous, he snapped. David wouldn't do that. He's not. Chris cut him off. He's a powerful man, Peter. A respected one. And between you and me, if I had to choose between keeping business with him or keeping business with you, another pause, I'd pick him every time. Click. The line went dead. The dominoes fall. Peter stood frozen, the phone still pressed against his ear long after the call ended. No, this wasn't possible. David was many things, controlled, strategic, even ruthless in court, but he wasn't the kind of man to destroy someone's life. Was he? His phone rang again. Another investor. The message? The same. Then another. And another. By noon, four major clients had pulled out. By 3 p.m., his suppliers refused to answer his calls. By 5 p.m., His entire business was gasping for air. And then came the final, fatal blow. The licenses revoked. Peter was still reeling when his secretary walked in, her face pale. "Sir," she said hesitantly, we just got a notice from the licensing board." He looked up, his stomach twisting. "What?" She swallowed hard, setting the document on his desk. Slowly, he picked it up and read the first line. "Effective immediately, the following business licenses have been revoked due to legal concerns regarding conflicts of interest and ethical violations." The rest of the words blurred. His business was dead. Officially. Legally. Irrevocably. Peter's realization. He sank back in his chair, his breathing shallow. This wasn't just bad luck. This was a precision strike. A targeted hit. And there was only one person capable of executing something like this. David. His old friend. His brother. The man he had stabbed in the back. And now, Peter was learning the hard way that David didn't just get even. He made sure you never got back up. The desperate call. By the time Peter gathered his thoughts, he had 69 missed calls. Half were from Doris. The other half? Investors, employees, clients. All panicking, all trying to figure out what the hell was happening. And through it all, David hadn't answered once. Peter gritted his teeth and dialed again. Straight to voicemail. The same voicemail message that had played every single time he had tried to call that day. "You've reached David Landon. I'm unavailable. Leave a message." Beep. Peter exhaled sharply, gripping the phone. "David," he started, his voice strained. I don't know what you're doing, but you need to stop." Silence. He swallowed hard. "Look, I know we need to talk. Just call me back, okay? This has gone far enough." Click. Call ended. Message ignored. Peter stared at his phone, his heart pounding. For the first time in his life, he was afraid. Because David wasn't just mad. He wasn't just retaliating. He was erasing Peter from existence. And there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop it. The house was quiet that evening. Too quiet. Doris sat in the living room, gripping her phone so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The lamp beside her cast a dim, flickering glow, barely illuminating the worry etched on her face. She had called David. Again and again. No answer. Not a single response. Her hands trembled as she tried to call Peter next. But even before the first ring, she already knew what was coming. The same voicemail. "The number you are trying to reach is unavailable." Doris exhaled shakily, looking across the room. Michael sat stiffly on the couch, staring at his laptop, but he wasn't typing. His screen was frozen on something, a notification from his university. Eric, on the other hand, was pacing. He was never the one to sit still when things weren't going his way. And right now, nothing was going their way. Doris knew it. Her sons knew it. But no one wanted to say it out loud. Because that would mean admitting it. Admitting that David had done the impossible. That he had ripped their entire foundation apart. The tuition funds disappear. Michael hadn't spoken in over an hour. Not since he opened his student portal to check on his next tuition payment. Not since he saw the bright red notice at the top of the screen. Urgent, tuition payment past due. Immediate payment required to remain enrolled. His stomach had dropped. That couldn't be right. His tuition was always paid in advance. He never even thought about it. But when he checked his financial records, his heart started racing. The money was gone. His father had pulled everything. Michael had always assumed, always believed, that his education was something guaranteed. That it would always be there, just like his father always had been. Now, he wasn't so sure about either. He thought back to what they had told him just last night. "Uncle Peter is more like a father to us now." His stomach twisted. He had chosen wrong. Eric's lifestyle crumbles. Eric was the first one to break the silence. "Mom," he snapped, running a hand through his hair. "I just tried to buy gas, and my card was declined." Again, Doris barely reacted. She just kept staring at her phone, her mind elsewhere. He scoffed, pacing. "I called the bank, guess what? My account has been drained." He spun around, looking at his mother and brother. "Is anyone going to say it? Dad is cutting us off." Michael clenched his jaw, but still said nothing. Doris, however, finally let out a slow breath. "Yes," she admitted. "He is." Eric let out a bitter laugh, throwing his hands up. "Well, that's just great. I mean, really, what did you think was going to happen? You let Uncle Peter walk all over him. And now we're all screwed." Doris snapped her head toward him. "I didn't let Peter do anything," she hissed. "Your father." She stopped herself, exhaling sharply. Your father is just retaliating. That's all. Eric scoffed again. Retaliating? Mom, wake up. Dad is burning everything down. And for the first time that day, Doris believed it. The phone call that changed everything. When the house phone rang, the entire room went still. Doris snatched it up so fast that she nearly dropped it. David, she breathed. But the voice on the other end wasn't David's. It was her mother, and her tone was sharp. Cold. Doris, Margaret said. Are you sitting down? Doris frowned, gripping the phone tighter. What's wrong? Margaret exhaled, as if preparing for something heavy. Then she said the words that made Doris's vision blur. Your father's retirement fund is gone. Doris's mouth went dry. What? She whispered. Margaret continued, her voice steady. I checked this morning. The accounts, the ones David managed for us, they're empty. Every last cent. We're broke, Doris. Doris couldn't breathe. But that's not possible. David wouldn't. Oh, wouldn't he? Margaret's voice sharpened. Because I think he would. And I think he just did. Doris's mind reeled. Her father, her mother, they had relied on David for years. His investments, his management, his ability to make things work. And now? Now it was all gone. She squeezed her eyes shut. Her own parents were paying for her mistake. And for the first time since this all began, she felt something she never thought she would. Regret. The realization hits. Doris barely remembered hanging up the phone. Everything was a blur. Her mother's voice still rang in her ears. We're broke. Her son's accusations still burned in her chest. What did you think was going to happen? And above all else, the silence from David was deafening. She had thought, naively, foolishly, that he would be angry, that he would yell, argue, throw accusations. But he hadn't. Instead, he had simply removed himself. And in doing so, he had destroyed everything. He had let them make their choice. And then he had shown them what that choice cost. And now, as she sat there, gripping her phone like a lifeline, Doris finally understood the brutal truth. David wasn't coming back. He wasn't going to save them. He wasn't going to fix it. And for the first time in her life, she realized. She had never actually known him. She had known the version of David who did everything for them. The version of David who loved her unconditionally. The version of David who never fought back. But the real David? The real David was the man who was watching them crumble. And he wasn't lifting a single finger to stop it. The house of cards collapses completely. That night, as Doris lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, she thought about how quickly everything had fallen apart. A single night. That's all it had taken. Yesterday, she had thought she had everything. Today, she had nothing. And worst of all, she had no one to blame but herself. Doris had never known fear like this. Not when she was a broke college student struggling to pass her finals. Not when she was a young mother, overwhelmed with twins crying through the night. Not even when she realized she no longer loved her husband the way she once had. No, this fear was different. Because this time, it wasn't just about her. This time, she had lost everything. And worse, she didn't know how to fix it. The house was in chaos. Her sons were panicking. Her mother was calling nonstop. Peter had gone silent. And the only person who could fix it, the man she had betrayed, wasn't answering her calls. The calls began. She tried one more time. The phone rang, and rang, and rang, straight to voicemail. You've reached David Landon. I'm unavailable. Leave a message. Doris clenched her jaw, fighting the burning in her throat. He was ignoring her. She tried texting. No response. She emailed. Nothing. Then, desperation took over. She picked up the house phone, because surely, he wouldn't ignore a call from his home. But he did. And that's when she knew. This wasn't a game. David wasn't coming back. The sons begged. Michael and Eric had never worried about money before. It was always there. Until now. Until their father, the man they had dismissed, replaced, mocked, had taken it all away. And they weren't handling it well. I don't understand, Michael muttered, pacing. He can't just cut us off like this, can he? Eric scoffed. Yeah, genius. He just did. Michael ran a hand through his hair. Okay, but Mom, he won't let us go homeless, right? He won't just abandon us. Doris swallowed hard. She wanted to say no. She wanted to tell them David would come back. But the words wouldn't come. Because she wasn't sure anymore. Eric grabbed his phone. Screw this. I'm calling him myself. He dialed. Voicemail. Michael tried next. Voicemail. Then they tried begging. Dad, come on. We were just upset. We didn't mean it. You're still our father, okay? Just call us back. Dad, please. We're sorry. Dad, we need you. But David never answered, and the silence hurt more than anything he could have said. Doris's last attempt. Doris knew what she had to do. She had to see him, force him to listen, force him to forgive her. So she got in her car, the one David had bought her, and drove straight to his office. But when she arrived, the receptionist wouldn't let her through. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Landon," the woman said, her voice carefully neutral. "Mr. Landon has given explicit instructions not to see you." Doris's stomach dropped. Not to see her? Her own husband? She forced a smile. "Maybe you misunderstood. We're married. He'll see me." The receptionist hesitated. Then, with quiet sympathy, she handed Doris an envelope. Doris took it with trembling fingers, her heart hammering. She stepped aside, ripped it open, and pulled out a single document. A divorce petition. Filed. Signed. Ready. A note was attached. 5 simple words. "There's nothing left to fix." Doris couldn't breathe. She had lost. And David? David had already moved on. The mother's warning. That night, when Doris got home, her mother was waiting. Margaret sat in the living room, hands clasped, watching as Doris stumbled through the door, shell-shocked. She already knew. Doris could see it in her eyes. The disappointment. The resignation. The judgment. "I told you to be careful," Margaret said, her voice calm but sharp. Doris let out a bitter laugh. "Careful? Careful about what, Mother?" Margaret exhaled, shaking her head. "About underestimating a man like David." Doris clenched her fists. "You told me." "I told you that men adjust," Margaret interrupted smoothly. "I told you that your father adjusted. That doesn't mean David would." She gave Doris a long, cold look. "I told you what you needed to do to keep him. And instead, you let your pride ruin everything." Doris gritted her teeth. "I just wanted my freedom." Margaret nodded. "And now you have it. Tell me, how does it feel?" Doris said nothing. Because the answer? It felt like hell. Peter breaks. By midnight, Peter finally cracked. His business was gone. His finances were in ruins. His best friend had destroyed him. And for the first time, he realized why. Because he deserved it. Because David had trusted him. Because David had built him. And he had betrayed him. But he wasn't going to accept this. So he did the one thing he had left. He drove to David's house, stormed up the front steps, and pounded on the door. "David," he shouted, "come out and face me." Silence. Then, slowly, the front door opened. And there David stood. Calm. Unbothered. Cold. Peter's rage faltered. Because the man standing in front of him wasn't angry. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't out for revenge. He had already won. And Peter? Peter was already finished. David tilted his head slightly. "What exactly do you want, Peter?" he asked, voice calm. Peter swallowed. "You ruined me." David nodded. "Yes." Peter's hands clenched. "You had no right." David stepped forward, eyes dangerous. "I had every right," he murmured. And Peter, for the first time in his life, felt fear. Because David wasn't just getting even. He was making sure Peter never got up again. The final begging. Doris called one last time that night. One last attempt. One last plea. "David, please. We were wrong. I was wrong. Just talk to me. Just give me one more chance." But there was no response. And this time, there never would be. Because David was already gone. And he wasn't looking back. I watched the phone vibrate on the table. Doris. Again. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't hear it. Not because I was busy. But because she no longer deserved an answer. I let it ring. And ring. Until it stopped. Then, a minute later, another call. This time from Michael. Then Eric. Then Doris's mother. All of them. One after another. I let them all go to voicemail. Because for the first time in 19 years, I didn't owe them anything. Not my time. Not my patience. Not my presence. And certainly not my forgiveness. The confrontation they didn't see coming. I knew it wouldn't end there. I knew Doris well enough to expect the next move. So when she showed up at my office the next morning, I wasn't surprised. She stormed past the receptionist before anyone could stop her, slamming the door behind her. I leaned back in my chair, watching her. Her eyes were red, her hands shaking. She was desperate now. Good. She deserved to be. "David," she started, her voice raw. "Please." I didn't say anything. I just watched her, letting the silence do the work. She took a breath, swallowing hard. I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt you." I tilted my head slightly. "Which part, Doris? The lying? The betrayal? The planning? The fact that you had no intention of stopping until I caught you?" She flinched. That was the truth, wasn't it? She wasn't sorry she had done it. She was sorry I found out. She took another step forward. David, please, she whispered. I love you. I let out a slow, quiet breath. Then I stood, walked around the desk, stopped right in front of her. And then I said the words that would finally end this. No, you don't, Doris. Her breath caught. Her lips trembled. I didn't stop. You never did. Not in the way that mattered. Her eyes shone with tears. That's not true. I cut her off. You love what I did for you. You loved what I provided. You loved the security, the lifestyle, the illusion. But me? The man? The husband? You haven't loved me for years, Doris. Maybe you never did. She shook her head rapidly, stepping closer. That's not true. I made a mistake. I smiled. That small, cold, knowing smile. The one that finally made her stop. You didn't make a mistake, Doris, I said softly. You made a choice. And now, she had to live with it. The sons who chose the wrong side. By the time I got home that evening, my sons were waiting. Michael and Eric stood in the living room, arms crossed, their faces grim. I shut the door behind me and leaned against it. Silence. Then, finally, Michael spoke. Dad, come on, he said, his voice tight. Isn't this a little extreme? I didn't respond. He sighed. I mean, okay, we get it. Mom screwed up, but don't you think ruining us is a little much? I raised an eyebrow. Ruining you? I repeated, voice flat. Eric scoffed, shaking his head. Dad, we have nothing left. No money. No security. No future. I let that sit between us for a moment. Then I pushed off the door, walked right up to them, and said the words that finally made them understand. Welcome to the life you thought I didn't matter in. Michael's mouth snapped shut. Eric swallowed. I tilted my head. You thought I was just there, just existing, that my presence was optional, that I was just a provider, a bank account. And when you thought you had a replacement, I let out a quiet chuckle. You dismissed me like I was nothing. They didn't speak, because they knew I was right. And now? Now, they wanted me to fix it. Now, they wanted my money, my security, my presence. But they had already chosen. And so had I. Peter's last attempt. I should have expected it. That final, desperate move. That night, as I packed the last of my things, Peter showed up, banged on my door. I opened it, unsurprised. He stood there, looking like a man who had lost everything. Because he had. David, he started, his voice rough. We need to talk. I didn't move. I didn't invite him in. I just looked at him. He exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. I screwed up, he muttered. I know that. But you destroyed me, man. You ruined my business, my reputation, my entire damn life. I let him talk. Let him spill his excuses, his regrets, his pathetic attempts to shift the blame. Then, finally, I spoke. Good. Peter blinked. What? I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Good. I want you to know what it feels like to lose everything. To be betrayed by someone you trusted. To have the people you cared about turn their backs on you. He swallowed hard. David, I didn't mean. I cut him off. You did. And that's why I don't care. His face paled. For the first time, he understood. There was nothing to fix. There was no forgiveness. No second chance. I let the silence stretch between us. Then, finally, I shut the door. And locked it. Because Peter? Peter was already dead to me. The goodbye that wasn't really a goodbye. The next morning, I packed my bags. I had everything I needed. My wealth. My power. My freedom. I walked through the house one last time, letting my fingers trail over the furniture, the walls, the pieces of a life that was never truly mine. Then, without looking back, I walked out the door, leaving them behind. For good. And the best part? I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel regret. I felt free. Finally. Completely. Free. I stepped into the hotel lobby, feeling lighter than I had in years. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile. Welcome, Mr. Landon. Your suite is ready. Thank you, I said, handing over my card, the one Doris couldn't touch. As she processed my check-in, I glanced at my phone. 67 missed calls. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. They were still begging, still scrambling to reach me, still trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. But it was too late. Because for the first time in 19 years, I wasn't theirs to manipulate anymore. I was done. And they were exactly where they deserved to be. The fallout begins. By the next morning, the desperation had reached its peak. I ignored their calls all night, but the messages kept coming. Doris, David, please. I'm begging you. Just talk to me. Michael, Dad, come on. Let's just meet and figure this out. Eric, we screwed up. We know that. But we're still your family. Margaret, Doris's mother. David, enough of this. You've made your point. That one almost made me laugh. Made my point. No, I wasn't done making my point. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee, as I watched everything unravel from a distance. Doris faces reality. Doris must have finally realized how deep she was in when she went to the bank, again. Except this time, she wasn't just trying to access her frozen accounts. She was trying to save herself. She wanted a loan. A desperate, last-minute attempt to keep up the illusion that everything wasn't falling apart. But she should have known better. Because when the loan officer looked at her records, all he saw was a woman with no financial stability. No job. No steady income. Nothing of her own. She had been comfortable for too long, relying on my money, my name, my influence. Now she had none of it. So when the bank denied her loan request, she walked out with a stunned, broken expression. Because for the first time in her life, she truly had nothing. Michael and Eric learned the hard way. Michael tried to keep up his usual confidence. He called his college, demanding they give him an extension on his tuition. He argued. He negotiated. He tried to leverage my name. But my name? It didn't belong to him anymore. The financial aid office wasn't interested in his excuses. They gave him a 7-day deadline. If he didn't come up with the payment, he was out. Eric, meanwhile, had his own wake-up call when he went to get his car serviced, only to find out the payments hadn't gone through. That's when it finally hit him. He didn't own his car. I did. And now? Now, the repo company was on its way to take it back. I imagined the look on his face when he realized he wasn't as independent as he thought. He had spent years thinking I was just a wallet. Now, he knew what it was like to live without it. Peter's final collapse. Peter was drowning. He had spent years riding on my connections, my influence, my generosity. He had stolen my wife, my family, my place. And now he had nothing. The moment I cut him off, his investors scattered. His business was already a corpse. But the real kicker? The lawsuits started rolling in. All those clients he had screwed over, the ones he had overcharged, the ones he had misled, the ones who trusted him because I vouched for him, they were coming for him now. And without my protection, he was finished. I imagined him sitting at his desk, staring at the pile of legal notices, realizing that the man he thought he had replaced had completely destroyed him. Good. Let him rot. The moment they broke. By the third day, the calls slowed. The messages turned from anger to pleading. They weren't demanding anymore. They weren't telling me to be reasonable. They were begging. And that's when I knew. I had won. I had broken them. I sat in my hotel suite, scrolling through the messages, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Because I was free. For the first time since I married Doris. For the first time since I had been manipulated into being the perfect husband and the perfect provider. I wasn't someone's safety net. I wasn't someone's backup plan. I wasn't someone's wallet. I was just me. And I liked that. The final call. It was a Friday evening when the last call came. I didn't expect to answer it. But something made me pick up. Not out of sympathy. Not out of regret. Just curiosity. I pressed the phone to my ear. Silence. Then, Doris's voice. Small. Broken. David. I didn't say anything. She exhaled shakily. I don't even know what to say. I took a sip of my drink. Then don't say anything. A pause. I need to understand. How do we end up here? I almost laughed. As if she didn't already know. But I answered anyway. We ended up here the moment you thought I was replaceable. She let out a quiet sob. Can't we fix this? She whispered. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. No, Doris, I said calmly. We can't. Another silence. Then, her final plea. David, I still love you. I smiled. A slow, knowing, victorious smile. And then, finally, I gave her my answer. That's nice, I said. But I don't love you. And with that, I hung up. The last laugh. I leaned back in my chair, stretching. Outside my window, the city lights gleamed, endless and full of possibilities. I was free, and they were drowning. But that wasn't my problem anymore. Not anymore. Because I had made my choice. I had walked away. And for the first time in 19 years, I was truly, completely, unapologetically happy.